Alright, so just 2 days ago I made a video on a build for Izanami and which items work for it and whatnot. This was made one day before the patch hit live, so you would be assuming that there were no changes to the character afterwards, because basically that's the final version of the PTS build, right? Wrong. HiRez decided that last second they should change something about the character, did not announce it anywhere, and now we're stuck with this. So, what happened? As you know, Izanami has two basic attack swings, so to speak. You have that one where your hit goes towards the enemy and then the return hit both deal damage, and on the PTS build both were able to crit. Q life servers, all of a sudden they don't. I checked back with HiRez caps lock and this is indeed intended. Apparently there's some weird interaction with the secondary crit that was not supposed to happen, so we're not gonna get that crit back, we're just gonna have to deal with it. But what does that mean for the build I created? What does that mean for certain items? First of all, Rage is out of the picture. Rage was better on Izanami than on any other hunter because you could get a crit on your secondary hit without actually consuming the passive of Rage, therefore having a higher crit chance for your second hit without having any downside to it. With that benefit gone, there's no reason to build Rage on her over anything else, and I would not recommend it. Same going for Poison Star, obviously. And now for the other crit items. When it comes to Wind Demon, nothing has really changed. You were never able to activate the passive on the crit on the way back, so that's okay, I guess. You can still have the high benefit of being able to clear a whole wave at once and then try to proc the passive on one of the 6 minions you're hitting at once, which is very, very likely, and therefore get your passive from Wind Demon up faster for a fight. So in that regard, it's still advantageous and should not be underestimated. An item that is, however, a lot weaker is Deathbringer. With Deathbringer only being able to crit on one part of the basic attack, the damage is actually not that high. You only get half of the extra damage of a normal crit, and as you can see here, as long as I have my steroid of the 1-up, the crits can still be really strong. But the normal crits on the ability itself are not that high. The crit here dealt 386 damage. To put that in perspective, we will now use Malice in the same build otherwise to see how effective that is in comparison to how much damage that deals. Here you'll see that the crit that I hit deals 341 damage. However, every tick afterwards deals an additional 88 damage as Malice still benefits from the normal scaling. The passive of Malice still fully applies, not 50% of it. So whenever I crit, I immediately get 341 damage plus pretty much 88. It's hardly any circumstance where I will not get that first tick with 88 damage, which is already 429, so more than Deathbringer. If all 3 ticks run through and I don't get another crit, then the damage is even more, so it's a lot stronger in comparison. To be fair, as long as your 1 is active, you will have a slight DPS advantage with Deathbringer if you crit many times in a row. But in the end, this will rarely happen, and overall, Malice should be a lot better simply because it also procs very well as long as your 1 is not active. So if you want to go crit, a mix of Malice and Wind Demon will probably be the best combination available right now. Other than that, I would stick with the same build as before. Transcendence, because the power is extremely high. Power Boots, then Ickvale, then Kinsize, because of the on-hit effect proccing on the first part of the hit. Titan's Bane most of the time, simply because it's so strong in combination with their abilities. And then build into Wind Demon and Malice and trade Ickvale out. That is not the only option though. With crit generally being nerfed, it's still great for 1v1 boxing, especially as long as you can activate your 1. It's still an extremely strong trade build, but sometimes you may want different things. In that case, you can just fully skip crit in this build and go for something else. There are a few items that work very well on her, which I will point out partially again and partially some new ones. An item that shouldn't be understated is Bloodforge. Bloodforge, once again, is great to give you some late game lifesteal, as lifesteal is not very beneficial for early, but can help in the late game. It also gives you a high amount of power, and a nice passive on top of that. The power is the core point here, simply because it's such a huge additional power spike, in combination with the high power from Transcendence already, and a passive that gives you a lot of penetration if you drop to low health. So that's a stupid amount of ability damage that you can get out of using Bloodforged in this scenario. Big part of the reason why this is so good is once again Izanami's extremely strong steroid on her 1 for her attack speed, which allows you to go into a more power focused build and not be as dependent on attack speed items. Another great item if you don't want to rely on crit is Brawler's Beatstick. Brawler's Beatstick has that flat penetration plus power, giving it roughly similar DPS to Bloodforge overall. What it doesn't provide you with is lifesteal, but it lowers the healing and also lifesteal of your enemies. So it's working in a different way, but with a similar result. It is more target dependent than anything else if Bloodforge or Brawler's Beatstick will help you more in the end. I would generally tend to lean towards Bloodforge a little more, but if you have the feeling that you have a benefit out of anti-healing, then Izanami is a hunter where Brawler's Beatstick is definitely justifiable. It was used in earlier builds in combination with Concise because of the penetration, and here it could make sense again. Yet another item that becomes more beneficial through the nerf of the crit variants is Odysseus' Bow. I briefly pointed this out in the last video, that the initial proc of the basic attack will still give you the full damage of Odysseus' Bow. This makes it a pretty solid choice for her, as it gives her a little more damage than the basic attack actually does, surprisingly, on the first hit. So, in the end, if your hit connects, every fourth hit will give you the damage of a full basic attack for only half a basic attack, and then give you half another basic attack on top of that, which can lead to some unexpected power spikes. What you should always keep in mind with this item is that it has a high amount of attack speed, which can bring you over the attack speed cap. While in this particular build it will only bring you over the attack speed cap ever so slightly, it can be less beneficial if you have a build that has more attack speed built in. As long as you combine this with another high power item, I think it is a great combination. Especially a combination of Bloodforge and Odysseus' Bow in the last two slots, one of them trading out Ikavel, is very, very strong, in my opinion, for this particular character. Just so you have a high amount of power, meaning your basics hit hard, and then you max it out with Odysseus' Bow, proccing it on a large amount of enemy targets. It's also very synergistic as such that Odysseus' Bow will work better the more power you have. Odysseus' Bow doesn't actually benefit from you having crit. The last item that I think is worth pointing out is the Crusher. The Crusher is stat-wise just a bad version of Brawler's Beatstick when it comes to actually trading. But as you're a hunter, it's not all too off that you will have to push down structures fast. In that regard, Crusher is just amazing and will greatly help you. So, while I wouldn't necessarily build it all that often if I have a coordinated team, it's with a team that is less coordinated, where you have the impression that split push is an option, I would not recommend against it, simply because it also gives you a decent amount of boxing potential. So in conclusion, a finished build could look something like this if you don't want to build crit. Obviously, there are many interchangeable variables here, so to speak. I would, however, recommend building one power item and one attack speed item in the mix most of the time to maximize your DPS. Otherwise, you're very reliant on the only attack speed that's on Concise if you trade out Ikavel, and your steroid, and you can't really do too much without your steroid because you are just too slow with your attacks, and that's not very beneficial. Just to be clear here, both the first proposed build with crit and this build work very well. It's slightly about different purposes that they have. This build is a little more focused on ability damage, and it has some more utility, for example, if you build Crusher. Also, it has some more teamfight impact thanks to Odysseus' Bow. The other build, the crit build, is better for direct trading if you have your steroid available. So your DPS with the crit build will be higher most of the time, simply because you can just hammer into a target for as long as your steroid is up and then back out if he isn't dead, which he should be. So they both have a niche, they both have a justification to exist, and they both fulfill the purposes they should. In the secondary build, you should always build Titan's Bane, as you're a lot more focused on that raw power and less on the boxing DPS, and it helps you a lot more for your ability damage than Executioner would, despite of having more DPS in the long run. So keep that in mind. If you're trying to do this build, do not build Executioner. It just doesn't work all too well together, and you will actually overcap on attack speed if you build Odysseus' Bow too early. So that's also not that great. There is yet another option which I've been asked about quite a lot, which is the old Veneno build, so starting with Shifter's Shield. Now, I personally don't like that option all too much, but let me explain why. If you have a full stacked Transcendence at level 20, it will give you 94 power. That's a huge chunk of extra damage. Even though I'm typically not the biggest fan of Transcendence, it just makes sense on Izanami because of her 120% scaling. So why do I think that Shifter's Shield is not that effective? First of all, let's keep in mind that the Veneno build was most effective before Soul Eater was nerfed. Back then, the passive of Shifter's Shield and Soul Eater interacted really well. They still do, but it's just not quite as great in that regard. Now, the question is, why would you build Shifter's Shield? Shifter's Shield has the purpose of giving you a decent defense and then power spike early on, which allows you to trade your lane opponent a lot more efficiently, and then eventually transition into other items that help you more. Now, the problem, or not so much the problem, but the issue that I have with it in regards to Izanami is that she doesn't really need any extra help in lane. She has solid clear, and yes, she has to stand in front of the wave in order to do that, but so does every other hunter, and she can still hit 3 targets if she stands at the side of the wave, so that can't be the argument. And as soon as L2 is leveled up a bit, her clear becomes insane. She's got one of the best hunter clears in the game. So she doesn't really need the assistance that other characters would have to have in order to clear early, which is one of the main purposes of Shifter's Shield. And then let's address what happens if you drop below 50% health. This is when your basics should be hitting the hardest because you have that extra penetration, which should give you the upper hand in a trade. You get some extra defense instead, which is also nice, but you now have 40 power. That is 54 power less than Transcendence, so more damage than a full Deathbringer would give you without crits. At the same time, there's the issue with Soul Eater. In a Shifter's Shield Veneno build, you wanna have Soul Eater just to get that synergy between the two items going. And Soul Eater is great, but it's also not great for her. It is good because she doesn't actually benefit much from lifesteal, but the shield will still be a shield, so in that sense it's better for her than Asi, simply because she cannot make much use of the passive of Asi, but the Soul Eater's shield will still exist to the same extent. However, she does not benefit from the high lifesteal value that Soul Eater generally has, and she does not really get too much out of the stats of the item otherwise. 20% lifesteal is great for other hunters, it's not for her. 30% attack speed is great for other hunters, not so important for her because she has a massive steroid. So all you're left with, which is really that good for her, is the passive. And buying an item for the passive alone makes it an arguable choice, especially when you could build Kins around the same time and deal a lot more damage than you would with Soul Eater. So that all in all leaves that option out there to go into the classic Veneno build and try to make that work, but I would generally recommend against it when it comes to how she works and when her power curve spikes and whatnot. So I see the point behind it. I see why people want to do it and will do it, and I'm not going to stop anyone from it. I personally think it is not the most efficient choice for her in combination with what her kit offers otherwise. You want to have the highest amount of power when your penetration is the highest, which is at low health, and you don't benefit all too much from lifesteal or attack speed, so that in combination makes it a less potent choice for her in my eyes. That's obviously only my opinion, and I do not disagree with those who disagree with that. In conclusion, I hope that HiRez does stop changing characters last minute because I have to make a new video every time, but oh well, so be it. I hope this was informative once again and helps you with your games. Thank you guys for watching. I will be streaming right when this video is up, so feel free to stop by and say hi. Otherwise, I'll see you for the next video tomorrow. Duke, out.